Hello everybody and welcome to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. Today's episode involves a spoiler from the newest Murders of Karlov Manor set. We have probably one of the craziest hate bears ever printed, and I have a feeling this might make a splash in cEDH. Today we're talking about Doorkeeper Thrull. This is a flash flying 1/2 for 1 and a white, and it says artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. Now, this is an insanely efficient statted body, right? We're talking about a 1/2 flyer, which is already good for a lot of decks that want to be playing these type of Hushbringer effects, and we'll talk about Hushbringers in a second. But this body is actually really efficient, so it really works well with things like Winota and Tymna and Jetmir and decks that kind of want to be going for this type of effect anyways. Now, historically, Winota hasn't really played a lot of these anti-ECB effects, but we're getting a certain redundancy of them now where the deck might be able to switch onto an effect like that and maybe have a bit of an advantage in the modern metagame. This card is no doubt very strong, and to highlight how strong it is, let's compare it to the options that we've had available to us in the past. So here we have the 5 different cards that exist currently that sort of mimic this effect. We obviously have the efficient Torpor Orb, which can be played for 2 colorless mana, and it prevents creatures entering the battlefield from causing abilities to trigger, right? So creature ETBs shut off completely, and this one has been iconic because it was the first of these effects to be ever printed. It's also very efficient and easy to cast. In the same way that like Collector Oof gets compared to Null Rod, Torpor Orb is the artifact easy to cast version of this effect. The other best 2-drop for this effect has been Hushbringer historically. Another flying lifelinker. Lifelink obviously exclusive to Hushbringer, but a flying 1/2 body seems very similar. But it says creatures entering the battlefield or dying don't cause abilities to trigger. So Hushbringer has been historically so good at stopping these types of effects that it often is too good at that effect. Now, Hushbringer's place in the history of our format has been really interesting because the decks that can play it definitely do. But as you notice, there's no flash to Hushbringer, right? So we're already looking at a limited thing compared to our new Thrull. I will say also that our Hushbringer does stop dying abilities to trigger, which in some cases can actually be a bad thing because certain decks that could take advantage of things like Hushbringer might want to be playing packages like Hulk and things like that. If you wanted a flash Torpor Orb in the past, you had to use Hushwing Gryff, and this is maybe one of the most interesting parts of this conversation. Now, the 2 mana value of the other types of Hushbringer effects is very strong, but Hushwing Gryff would often see itself performing a little bit better than those effects, specifically because you could catch your opponents off guard, right? They could have a Dockside on the stack, they could have a Thassa's Oracle on the stack, and be none the wiser to not realize that Hushwing Gryff would be able to stop those ETBs and blow them out. Now, Hushwing Gryff has one big downside in our current metagame because it has that 1 toughness. Whereas we can see with our brand new Thrull, it has 2 toughness, which does actually make a really significant difference, especially in a Bowmasters metagame. There's also Takali Honor Guard having a great 3 toughness here, but definitely having one of the most limited versions of this where, you know, it has the Torpor Orb text, but it's a 1/3, doesn't have flash, doesn't have an evasive body, doesn't have any sort of extra text on top of it. And then we have Elorn, Mother of Machines. Now, Elorn is the only other of these creatures that we've talked about that also, I guess, or permanents, if we're talking about Torpor Orb as well, but it's the only other one that also shuts down artifacts. Now, it may not seem like artifacts are a huge part of this, but it's also important to note that artifacts can have some pretty powerful ETBs. And even if it's as simple as shutting down someone's Chrome Mox, right? They can't imprint a card on their Chrome Mox if you have our Thrull or if you have Elorn. But once again, to get sort of that universal version of this effect, we've had to pay 5 mana, which is definitely a lot more than our 2 flashy mana here with our Thrull. The only other comparable card we've had in the past was Strict Proctor, but that is one that your opponents could actually pay to override the ability, which was great as a tempo play, but once again, it doesn't have flash, and your opponents can sort of plan their turns around the Strict Proctor being on the battlefield. All in all, it's really hard to argue that this Thrull is not insanely efficiently statted, right? It has 2 cancellation effects on a static ability. That flash part of this card, I cannot stress enough, is so important, right? Definitely the artifacts not having ETBs is decent, but I can't stress enough that the best part about this card is creatures not having entered the battlefield and the fact that it has flash. A 2-mana flash creature that can interrupt your opponent's turns is so huge. I mean, the amount of times you hear people talking about, oh, well, I play Dress Down to shut down a Thassa's Oracle or shut down a Dockside on the end of the battlefield. There are so many powerful effects that this can hose, and especially, once again, Dockside and Thassa's Oracle being the two most definitive versions of this. And another thing to mention while we're going through this topic is, yes, this is the best version of this effect, but on top of that, now we have a very solid redundancy of efficient versions of these effects. I mean, how many 2-drops did we just talk about in this, right? We have Hushbringer, Tocatli, Torpor Orb, and now our Thrull. On top of the fact that we could also, if we really need to, play Strict Proctor. Now we have 2 flash threats with Hushwing Grift and our Thrull, right? So now we are starting to have a really solid redundancy of these effects. Not only did we get one of the best versions of these effects, but we also have more now, to the point where, you know, people often don't play these anti-ETB creatures because they are really hard to break parity on, right? But at a certain point, with a certain amount of redundancy for them, it's just worth it to build around that effect to be able to shut down some of the most powerful things that are existing in the format. So I'm very excited about this spoiler. I think our Doorkeeper Thrull is a huge pickup for cEDH, and I'm really excited to see if anti-ETB stacks maybe makes a little bit of a comeback in the current metagame. It's kind of hard right now to be fighting off these more proactive decks, but maybe with our reasonably Bowmaster-proof creature, we can start to make something happen. Thank you all for watching this video, and thank you for Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video. If anyone here wants to pick up some product from this current set, you can actually check a link down in the description below.
Afraid to turn out the lights.